Good afternoon to members of the media and to viewers watching us live on NTN and on YouTube. Welcome to today's press conference with Minister for Economic Development, Housing, Urban Renewal, Transport, Civil Aviation, Honorable Guy Joseph. Welcome, Minister.
Thank you.
Today, for the next hour, we will be taking questions on a variety of issues which fall within your purview. But I would like to begin today by asking you to give us an idea of your ministry, the portfolios you're in charge of, and just give us a summary of that portfolio.
The portfolios that I hold is, to summarize, would take quite a bit of time. So I would just choose to highlight a few key areas. We have the area of economic development, which is very critical to all ministries that forms the government. It is important because over the past years, we have seen a lot of stagnation in the economy of St. Lucia. I believe that part of the reason for this is because there's not that level of coordination that is required to drive economic development. I will go into greater detail as we go along as far as this is concerned. Then we have the area of housing and urban renewal. In the last 20 years, I would say we've not had any major housing developments in St. Lucia. In fact, the reports are showing that the housing stock, there's a lot of demand for housing in St. Lucia. The second area of major concern for me as far as housing is concerned is something that I'm working along with the Ministry of Planning on because of the challenges that we face. We complain about the price of land in St. Lucia and how it impacts the average St. Lucian to be able to afford a piece of land. But what is happening is that we have created our own system that makes the price of land prohibitive for locals. I can tell you anybody can buy land at 50 cents a square foot. By the time they are completed with the development cost, it may be $10 and $12 a square foot. So that is something that needs to be revisited, and I have looked at it from the standpoint of the Ministry of Planning, WASCO, Lucilec, and all of the entities, and a lot of rules that we have there that we can do away with in terms of reducing the cost. Then you have urban renewal. I mean, you look at Castries today, and while we've always had a ministry responsible or the title of urban renewal, we have not seen this happening. And that is why we have a redevelopment plan in progress for Castries. Then we go on to transport. I think way back when I was the president of the Minibus Association, and even when I served as Minister of Transport, we have not seen major changes in the transport sector. And if you would recall, when I was Minister of Transport previously, we were able to open an office in Viewfort that persons can get their driver's license and carry out various transactions. We started the Atlas system with the government of Taiwan to replace the AS400 system that we have for the issuing of driver's license. Everything remained the same over the last few years. So there was not even a merger of the two systems where you have one set of records on AS400, you have another set on Atlas, and the project was never completed. To date, since I came in, we had to order a machine to print driver's license. I had to get a machine for Viewfort so that somebody do not have to travel from Viewfort to come up to Castries. Then the public transport system is basically the same. The taxi sector is the same. We have not seen any major changes. So we have to revitalize that entire sector. Then we go on to civil aviation, which deals with the air licensing for commercial flights, for domestic flights, whatever the case may be. This department is very limited, and with the challenges we've had with ECA on a regional level, We know all of the problems to get an airline to operate in this region. These are matters that we must deal with. For some reason, it does not appear under my portfolio, but the area of telecommunications is also part of my portfolio. I've been dealing with the issues in relation to number portability, where if you are switching from one provider to another, that you can carry forward with the same telephone number that you had previously. We are also looking at a number of other areas. In fact, later this month, I'm supposed to be in St. Vincent because I'm presently chairing the ECTEL Council of Ministers in terms of getting some of the legislation we need through to deal with this. So in a nutshell, these are a number of the areas that I have to focus on and to get everything going in each of these departments.
Okay, I will ask the media to get ready if any questions they would have in terms of the comments that the minister just made. But I wanted you to kind of tell us a little bit about your recent trip to Washington. You were part of the delegation that went to the World Bank, IMF annual meetings in Washington. Tell us a little bit about what took place there and what inroads St. Lucia actually made at this conference.
These meetings are meetings where the small island developing states have a lot of challenges to be able to make the kind of impact and inroad that we need. I must tell you that since Minister Chasney became Prime Minister of St. Lucia, we've made a lot of inroads at that level. It was quite refreshing going to these meetings and seeing, I would say, 8 out of 10 panels, he sat on the panel at the head table. And it tells you that his first trip to Washington last year really created an impact for us as a country. Because you would know that you're talking about all of the major players, World Bank, IMF, and you're talking about all of the countries affiliated to these organizations being present. And for one prime minister to feature so prominently is a good sign for us. It means that the messages that he sent across previously is beginning to resonate. Some of the better things I saw coming out of the meeting is we've been talking a lot about adaptation and mitigation in terms of our resilience as it relates to climate change. And I know that from the meetings in Marrakesh in that forum that was held last year, we've been able to make some very good inroads. And it appears that both the World Bank and the IMF, they are beginning to understand the plight of the small island developing states. And I think the spate of hurricanes that we had in over the last couple of months really brought to the front the arguments that we were putting forward in relation to the real impacts of climate change. And Dominica being represented, and Antigua and all of the other islands that was impacted in the manner that it was, really got the message across to the point where we got commitments from the World Bank that they had committed certain sums of money and they were going to relax on some of the procurement guidelines as far as being able to assist the countries in moving forward with speedy implementation. Because we were able to speak, one of the issues that when I got a chance to make a contribution was on the basis that Hurricane Thomas was in 2010. We are still in the process of project implementation financed by the World Bank. And we are in 2017, end of 2017. So that's the reality of where we are as far as that is concerned. But I think the strongest point that we came out of there, all of these countries in this region were being graduated as middle-income countries. Once you are graduated as a middle-income country, it reduces the chances of getting concessionary financing and low interest financing to respond to a lot of the issues that are confronting us. It was very refreshing to hear the World Bank state that they are going to consider this Caribbean region, the small island developing states, to be considered for financing at the lower interest level as developing states rather than as middle-income countries. I think that once we can achieve that, and they would keep to the mandate given, it would really help us in accessing funds at a much better concessionary rate than we are getting presently.
Okay, thank you, Minister. Do we have any questions before we move on to the other items on the agenda on anything the Minister has said so far? We have a roving mic, so just please introduce yourself and ask the question.
Good afternoon, Minister. Janika Simon. I have two questions for you. You noted that the price of land for locals is getting, almost unaffordable. My question is, would you be in favor of land reforms that would make it more difficult for foreign nationals to purchase land?
Living in a globalized marketplace, that is going back. That is not going forward in terms of our development. Where we want to go as a country, you look at our population of 170,000 people and the size of St. Lucia. And that's one of the reasons why the economy, the size of the population in relation to the land mass and the development that is required, the proportions are not equal. So I do not think that the issue is one of foreigners owning land in St. Lucia. I think it's an issue of the measures that we have put in place ourselves. So take, for example, if you develop in a housing area with more than 60 housing lots, the Ministry of Health requires that you build a sewage treatment facility, which would eventually be handed over to WASCO. You have to build a 100,000 gallon water tank or a 50,000 gallon water tank. All of that is added onto the price of the land, in addition to the roads and all of the infrastructure. So by the time you look at that, these are the measures that I'm talking about that is making the cost of land prohibitive for locals to be able to afford, both from a developmental standpoint and also from a purchaser's standpoint. So that is what is critical for us to understand, that we are the ones who introduce measures. We are the ones who put the rules there. And then it becomes prohibitive for our locals. But an American coming here or a British person where the conversion rate is 2.7169 or 2.68 for the US dollar, maybe 4.5 for the pound, or the euro, maybe about 3 to 1. The cost of buying land for them is cheaper than it really is for us because of the exchange rate. What can we do? Now, if you ask me about zoning and about whether we think that there should be areas that are designated, that could be a possibility. But then you do not want to create a class society where you are going to say these people can live in that area and other people cannot live there. So I believe in the integrated society. And that is why if you look at the approach that we are taking from the Ministry of Housing and the NHC towards land development is to revisit the models that were established and to see how we can make the land cheaper. And if you take the Forestier Housing Development Project as an example, which is one of the first projects that we rolled out, you would see that the cost of development came at the cheaper than what land was developed 10 years ago in St. Lucia.
Okay. My second question to you is, you mentioned the work that you had done in your previous tenure helping the people of Viewfort get access to government services in the area of driver's license. Now, the previous administration had announced plans to construct an administrative complex in Viewfort that would have provided a lot of other government services. Would you, in terms of your role as Economic Development Minister, knowing that productivity is a large portion of economic development, support a project to construct an administrative center similar to what the previous administration was proposing, whether in the same footprint or different footprint altogether?
Let's get a couple points on this straight. The construction of an administrative building does not result in services in the building. It is the mechanisms that government would put in place that would determine the outcome. So if you could have highlighted, there are 10 services provided by the government in the south of the island that is spread out over a number of areas, and you want to centralize these operations, then I could understand the rationale for moving in this direction. But putting down a building in and of itself is not a result of services. And you can use the NIC building that is down in the main part of the Viewfort town. And if we are talking about economic development, let's look at the demands on government. Presently, the rental bills for government is about $44 million a year. We are paying in rental fees. You look at the proportion of that in Castries as opposed to Viewfort. Where does it leave us? Now, government is renting almost every building in Castries. There are just a few buildings that are rented by the government in Viewfort, which actually adds to the vitality of the economy of the south of the island. If you cut out all of these people from getting any rental from government, what is the likely impact of that on Viewfort? And pay attention to what has happened to the town in Viewfort. When buildings were moved and government offices were moved to new locations. So while we are looking at the service that is required, it must be clear that there must be a proper balance between how much government owns and how much government leases. And it's evident in Castries. We have all the waterfront buildings. We have the new financial center building. Yet still government is still renting so many offices. So at the end of the day, what needs to happen for Viewfort is there needs to be a comprehensive plan. It cannot be just something that, what was the plan? One administrative building to provide what services? What is it that the government was offering? And if you investigate the manner in which it was being done, it was still under a rental arrangement because it was being financed by the NIC, and then the government would lease it for a period of time. So it's just like the normal bolt arrangements that were there. So we have to look at the overall impact. Would it create more jobs for the people of St. Lucia? Would it be a boost to the economy? Because as we would discuss, I'm hoping as we go along, we can have some serious discussion about economic development and where we need to go. Because we are talking the talk, but we are not ready to walk the walk in St. Lucia when it comes to what it takes to really develop a country and make it work. Those people who want to make us believe that because government opens an office, when government opens an office, it is costing the taxpayers money. When the private sector opens an office or a building, it is generating revenue for the economy. And that is the balance. These are the types of discussions we need to have about development and growing this economy.
We have another question.
Channel Novel Choice TV. As it relates to telecommunications, we had the recent merger of Flow and Cable and Wireless, which actually limited the options for St. Lucians. It's no secret that the public has been complaining about Flow's service not reliable, and some people have no service in some areas. What are we doing as a country to ensure that our people have options? Or if not, since the monopoly already exists, how can we ensure that we get the level of service that we need? What is the government doing? Is there some legislation that's going to be put through? And also the role of NTRC, what are they doing in that sphere?
That's a very complicated question to answer, but I will seek to summarize it. What we inherited with the merger is something that it's not the best situation, but in the private sector and in the area of business, we look at major economies in the world and you have these mergers. Usually when you have these mergers, it goes through a process and they have some people who have some influence in the determination of these mergers. What we are trying to do as ECTEL member states is to deal with the issue of the problems being faced in telecommunications. And I can tell you, I can speak firsthand to what the issues are from my home. Although I live in a very high elevation, I have major challenges with getting the quality of service. And I've spoken to both providers. So it's not like it's one provider that's at fault and not another provider. What we are attempting to do now, and I can inform St. Lucia that Lime, their application is still pending. It was sent to me to be addressed. There were some issues that were not clear, and I have since written to the company and requested of them that before this license is renewed, we need to know what the merger entails, what the expectations are moving forward, and how it is going to work. Take, for example, if we need a third provider, because of the limited space on the telephone poles, where you can have only 2 sets of lines, you have the same company occupying both slots on the of the wires running or the lines running throughout the country. Can they merge into one and create the opportunity for another player to come in? Now, you know that in the real business world, it's not easy to get that. That's not an easy sell. But I believe that as a government, we have taken a very hard line that unless we know where this is going, we are not going to give the providers just what they want without knowing what the country is getting in return. We had a lot of pushback from the issue of number portability, because one provider who may be the dominant provider would not want number portability because a lot of people hold their number sacred. And they would not move, they would not switch telephone companies just for the sake of preserving that number that everybody knows them to have. With number portability now, it means that you can switch provider and still remain with your same number. We got a lot of pushback and resistance, but we've been able to negotiate and overcome these hurdles, and the legislation is coming into effect. So as far as the quality of service is concerned, part of the problems we were told why the service was so bad, it was because of the hurricanes and some damages that may have occurred. But I know some of you will conclude that you had these problems even before the hurricanes. But definitely from an ECTEL standpoint, and at the meeting of the Council of Ministers in St. Vincent later on this month, these are some of the issues that we will deal with, because we are trying to take a coordinated, collective approach towards the decision-making process, so that it is not just what happens in St. Lucia, but you can expect the same reaction in St. Vincent, Grenada, Dominica, and so on.
Rochelle?
Okay, I'm Rochelle Gonzalez from The Voice Publishing. This question refers back to what you mentioned when you mentioned the price of land. You mentioned that a plan is currently being formulated to make the price of land cheaper to purchase. What I want to know is this specialized for St. Lucians, or is it something that's free for everybody? Because in that case, if it is for everybody and not specialized for St. Lucians, doesn't that just make it easier for foreign nationals to swoop in and take even more than they initially wanted to, which will pretty much leave St. Lucians in the same, back to square one, making it difficult for them to own a piece of their own land?
I don't know that you can legislate and specifically state that this is the direction that you are going. If for example, we facilitate a housing development being done in St. Lucia, and the land is $10 a square foot, I don't know that you can discriminate against somebody else from, let's say, another Caribbean island, as an example. Sometimes we focus so much on the UK and the US and these places, but we forget about our own Caribbean brothers and sisters. So take, for example, what has just happened in Dominica. If a Dominican says, I want to relocate to St. Lucia, would they be able to buy a piece of land in St. Lucia at the same rate that a St. Lucian buys a piece of land? So I am not looking at legislation that is going to be discriminating against any individual in terms of land that is being purchased. But if you take, for example, the PROUD project that is being done, that's the land rationalization, only St. Lucians qualify to go into that area. If you take transport, I'm just using that as an example, for the route permit system, only St. Lucians qualify to go. So there are measures that you can use internally that would set it up in a manner where your people are the people who get the majority of the benefits with it. But I don't know that we can say if we legislate to reduce the price of a housing development that you can particularly discriminate against any individual.
Well, then in that case, what would you say to at least perhaps putting a cap on the amount of land that can be purchased by a foreign national? Because currently, we all know this is, well, with the birth of DSH, this is an issue that many St. Lucians have been talking about, being concerned that they won't be able to purchase land in St. Lucia. And so, in that case, a cap, perhaps, to say that, okay, there's only so much that you could, that a single person who's not St. Lucian can purchase, to give St. Lucians a chance, basically.
Okay, so let's put that in perspective. Who is selling the land? 90% of the land being sold to foreigners is done by private treaty, not government. So, you see, that is where the discussion must be honest. And that's not in relation to you. I'm talking in general. A lot of people who come out there and speak about what is happening in St. Lucia, how do you tell a St. Lucian who maybe resides overseas or lives in St. Lucia, and a foreigner comes to them and say, look here, you have these 10 acres of land, I'm giving you $1 million for these 10 acres of land. Do we legislate and tell this St. Lucian, you cannot sell that land to a foreigner, but you must sell that land to a St. Lucian for $200,000 or for $500,000? Because that's why the discussion in St. Lucia about these things, it's not an honest discussion. The amount of land owned by government is minimal in terms of land that can be resold. And if you go, most of the land owned by government is forest reserve, is nature reserve. It is not even available on the market for sale. So all of the land being sold to foreigners, the majority of it is really being sold by private treaty. And it is difficult for you to tell the government that they're going to legislate that, we have to legislate that a local person cannot sell their land to a foreigner. Now, on the issue of the DSH that you mentioned, a lot of the discussion about DSH is a myth. And no matter how many times the government puts out the information, the only level of agreement there is on DSH as we speak now is the horse racing track. There's not a single other area where a piece of land has been committed to DSH for anything. For that matter, DSH wanted to create the land. They didn't want to buy the land in St. Lucia. But we don't want to have an honest discussion about this. We want to find all kinds of reasons to say that is bad. But since you mentioned DSH, 1,000 acres of land, the Ashworth? Was
Ainsworth.
Robert
Ainsworth.
4,000 acres of land. So that's why I'm saying the discussion is not an honest discussion. One factory shell for a pharmaceutical company was supposed to be 1,000 acres. I mean, it's in the letter. It's in the record. But our people don't want to have these types of discussions. And that's why I'm saying when it comes to where we want to go as a country, and if we are seriously focusing on development. Now, if somebody really wanted to come and build a factory in St. Lucia that would occupy 1,000 acres of land, would I be opposed to that? I would not be opposed to it because we are talking about we need jobs for our people. And if we need jobs for our people, there's one way to create the jobs. And if that is going to create 5,000 jobs, why not? But the reality is there's ulterior motive for a lot of the discussions that are taking place, and the discussions are not honest. I want to have an honest discussion with the people of St. Lucia. I want to know that if we are selling land, and when they tell me we should not sell land, a lot of land was sold, and was sold very cheap prior to us coming into government. 3 days before elections. Beachfront property was sold at $3.65 a square foot. But we're expecting a hotel development to come on there. Now, if it was this government that did that, you would hear a lot of criticism, but because it's another government, it's okay. But the discussion must be honest and straightforward, and the people must deal with the matters as they ought to be dealt with.
I do want to move on to economic development, but based on what Rochelle was asking as well, I think an important question, especially for young people, is what housing and land projects is the government hoping to launch in the future where it could give young people an opportunity to own a piece of St. Lucia?
A lot of the projects, and that is why in my drive to make land available to St. Lucia.
And affordable?
And affordable. That in a lot of the packages we are looking at, we are not looking at house and land package. A lot of it we are looking at just a land package. I would much rather see a young St. Lucian invest in a piece of land than invest in a car. Now, I know the car dealers may have issues with me, the banks may have issues with me, but we are talking about the economic development of St. Lucia. Land appreciates in value. We have not taught our young people the value of investment. What is the value of money and what is real investment? So rather than the banks making it possible to get a car loan the same day, I would much rather see them make it possible for a young St. Lucian to own a piece of land the same day. So the thinking is make the land available. Allow them to work, pay for 4 or 5 years. Then they can refinance and build a house on it later on. Now, some people may tell me, why are you putting down all of this infrastructure and then no houses are being built? But these are the requirements that we must meet until we can change what the requirements are. For you to get a block and parcel number, for you to get approval from DCA, to sell a piece of land, it must have all of the facilities. So would we get to a point where we can do it otherwise? I'm not sure about that. But I don't mind putting down the facility now and making sure that St. Lucians can afford to buy a piece of land. So if they have $50,000 to invest it in owning a piece of St. Lucia, and then later on they can build a house.
Before we get to some of the hot topics I know the media is waiting for, the Prime Minister recently, during the budget, set forth the growth strategy for St. Lucia. We've seen some very positive signs in terms of agriculture, in terms of the tourism numbers. Where does the Ministry of Economic Development fall into in terms of ensuring that St. Lucia remains on this path to positive levels in terms of employment and growth, especially?
There must be a comprehensive plan that we have found a lot of difficulty in getting buy-in from everybody to move in the direction we need to go. The Prime Minister has indicated on a number of occasions that the growth that we need is to double the GDP in 10 years. Presently, our GDP cannot afford to sustain our livelihood. The demands on the public purse cannot be met with the present rate at which the country is growing. So there must be a plan to grow the economy. How do you grow the economy? We have looked at the key sectors: agriculture, tourism, manufacturing. I mean, what else do we have? You hear lots of discussions taking place about how we should grow the economy. I have said to my people in the Ministry of Economic Development, for example, I want you to tell me what kind of a house I can build in St. Lucia that is going to have the greatest impact on the local economy. Because these are the things that we need to be discussing about growing the economy. If we are going to be driving the construction sector, and everything we use for the construction sector is imported, then the impact on the economy is minimal. Whereas if the majority of the material that we are going to use to build the houses can be sourced locally, then definitely it would have a much greater impact on the economy. Take, for example, we are here. Look at the furniture that we are using. In my days growing up in St. Lucia, and I happen to have done quite a bit of work in the area of furniture, so I know about that. There were many furniture manufacturers in St. Lucia. From the schools, the furniture was supplied locally. A lot of the furniture sold at Courts and at Singer at the time, and Simpex, and all of these were manufactured locally. Some of the best mahogany and blue maho furniture you could get anywhere was made in St. Lucia. What has happened to all of these manufacturers? We introduced on the CSME, there was a 20% consumption tax that the local person had to pay. But when the same product came from Trinidad, they were not required to pay. How can our local manufacturers survive in an environment like this? So if we want to grow this economy, you are telling me that we don't have people who can build the furniture that we are importing for the schools? But here's the reality. What most people don't want to face is that they have people in the ministries with a vested interest in the furniture being imported rather than it being purchased locally. So they don't even ask the local furniture manufacturers to give them a sample. Because somebody in a ministry knows somebody who has the business who is importing the furniture. Now I know usually when I speak I step on some toes, but it really doesn't matter to me. At the end of the day, we have to deal with the core problems that we have. There are lots of things that can be produced. And I went to a furniture manufacturer at Bishop's Gap. And I spoke to another gentleman in Dennery who produces furniture. And when I look at the desk that I have in my office, and I look at the quality of furniture that he produces, his quality is far superior with blue maho and mahogany than what I have in my office. And the price differential is not much. Why won't I support my local economy and say that furniture should be purchased locally? Now, it must start with government. But you will not begin to understand the amount of resistance there is to going into this direction, because people have set up their companies, they have their brokerage, they have all kinds of things that are doing transactions for government. But really the transactions are done for themselves, not for the government of St. Lucia. Now that is where the problem resides in St. Lucia in terms of growing the economy. So we really don't care about what happens out there. If we had created 50 jobs for the young people of St. Lucia in the furniture manufacturing sector, what would have happened? The economy would be much more buoyant than it is. So if we want to have serious discussions about the economy, that is the direction that we must go. And it must start with government. The buy local campaign should not be for the people out there. The buy local campaign should begin with government. And when it begins with government, then the rest of the country can take its cue from the government.
Okay, do we have any questions in this area before we move on?
Yes,
before we get to St. Jude?
Sheffield Gillard, DBS News. In terms of agriculture, what are we doing, if we are doing anything, to supply agricultural produce to the islands that Dominica supplied in light of what has happened?
I can tell you that if you check the supermarkets today, you will see there's a major shortage of greens in St. Lucia. And it's because the prices on... so you don't even have to initiate that. The entrepreneurs have taken hold of that market, and a lot of the things are being exported. But that is why the Ministry of Agriculture is very critical to the growth that we are seeking in the economy, because what you would find happening, our reaction should not be just because there is a hurricane. If you recall during the campaign, and since we came into government, we've been highlighting the potential of the northern islands as a market. We've even been looking at the shipping to these islands, the possibility of the fast ferry that can take a certain amount of cargo, and the ability to provide sufficient for our local market and also for our export market. When we spoke years ago about the agricultural hub being down in cul-de-sac, where the new marketing board building was erected, that was the whole idea. The whole idea was have that marketing hub, have the key players involved, everything that is produced would be delivered there, packaged, paid for, and then delivered to the various entities. I know that the Minister of Agriculture is definitely moving in this direction. We've had several discussions about it, and I know in the coming months, you would be hearing a lot more from the Ministry of Agriculture in terms of the direction that we are going. Even the agro-processing plans that was built for value added to some of the products, especially the seasonal products. We are seeing, I know presently there's a Taiwanese investor who's doing some work in St. Lucia to help in the packaging and preserving of some of these seasonal fruits so that we can have added value for this market. Because these are all the things combined together that would give us the type of growth that we are looking for in the economy.
Okay, that's all in that section. Okay, thank you. The St. Jude Hospital fire occurred September 9th, 2009. Today, we're still very much speaking about St. Jude. It's very much in the news once again. The Prime Minister at the last press conference gave us an idea of the direction the government is going with the new site. I hope that you can speak to this once again to give us an overview of where we are now and some of the options that government is looking at. And then we will take questions from the media.
It is interesting that, and the discussions that have taken place over the past few months about St. Jude. It is unfortunate that it has become a Guy Joseph discussion more than it has become a St. Jude discussion. Fortunately or unfortunately, Guy Joseph did not have anything much to do with the St. Jude project when it started, other than being a part of the government then. People must not be dishonest in what they say when it comes to national projects. National projects are too important for the livelihood of this country for it to become something that is used for political reasons. I would expect that as a people, we would be outraged at the fact that we would have spent in the region of $118 million. And that is what we have for it, regardless of who did it. The first outrage should be, how can we justify spending $118 million? And that is what we end up with. And the records are there. I always tell people, records are there and they do not lie. Go to the records and see what we have there. The former Prime Minister, Dr. Anthony, in an interview said that he expected, when the hospital started at 30 million, it went to 47 million. He said he expected that it would have ended up at $60 million. But we would get a state-of-the-art hospital. Now, think of it. We did not spend 60. We spent 118. And this is what we have. What is down there today? Is that a state-of-the-art hospital? For almost twice the price that the then Minister of Finance indicated. I've heard a lot of discussions. I have the exit report by the former head of the St. Jude project for the period ending August 14, 2016. And I've heard a lot of discussions. I've read that report several times. What I can tell you about this report is that nothing that is going on there is new. This very exit report clearly states that the work being done on the St. Jude project when it started was a phase 1 set of works to relocate the people there, but there would be a new hospital in the south. It's in the report. Anybody can go and, because everybody have access to information, but they use the information conveniently or sparingly. They do not put out everything that is in the information. So the short-term solution, according to the report, temporary accommodation for the St. Jude Hospital. This would entail the reconstruction of the surgical building on the old site as well as renovation of the other 2 buildings and other required ancillary buildings. The ancillary would be made fully functional to allow St. Jude to relocate from the stadium and operate until the new facility is built on the new site. Now that is the report from Shanta King, who was the project coordinator. Everybody makes it look like the Alan Chasney-led government is inventing some kind of thing from the sky to come up with solutions to the problem. So even in the reconstruction process of St. Jude, and the medium-term solution, construction of a new healthcare facility for St. Jude Hospital on a new site. So I think that people went in there knowing full well what was happening. But some people will take these same reports and they will quote conveniently what they want from the report to say there was planning approval. There was no planning approval. The company that tendered was Halcro Yolps, Healthcare Credentials. I never saw that name after that document on anything at St. Jude. Now, coming to the Engineers Registration Board. Because all of a sudden, there is a passion by everybody about St. Jude. Now, I don't know if it's because Guy Joseph is associated with the project, but the reality is everybody who sat by for the last 6 years and never said anything, all of a sudden have a renewed vigor as if they were always so concerned about St. Jude. I don't question what is going on in people's minds. Maybe they were and they never said anything. So now is the opportune time. Let's take the Engineers Registration or Engineers Association. They have requested that a team of engineers be allowed to go and review the project. Well, I have news for them today. And the news is that some of the same people on the Engineers Registration Board was involved in what happened in St. Jude. And do they want me to give them permission to go and cover their tracks? And I challenge them to prove me wrong on what I'm saying there. That some of the same engineers on the Engineers Registration Board were the people who employed the persons as engineers who do not have engineering qualifications. And they knew it because they are part of the board. Now, when it comes to these things, how do I not deal with it? How do I sit there and pretend that everything is okay? And they'll tell you, oh, because you engage FDL, you don't want anybody else's input. If they ask me, if they want to bring a team from elsewhere, but not from the Engineers Registration Association. Because they, and I have evidence to what I'm saying. So if they want to challenge me, they can challenge me on it. I have evidence of who did the assessment of the hospital after the fire. I have evidence of who became the consultant and who was working for who on the hospital. And today, they are asking the government to allow them to review the project. They are the ones who messed up the project. Some of their own members messed up the project, but today they want to go back there, look at everything, and the same things they did to come back and tell me it's good. So you think anybody in their right mind would allow the same people who create the problem to go back and assess the problem and tell you there's a problem with the problem? It's not going to happen. But the situation we are faced with is a lot of dishonesty about everything that has transpired in relation to St. Jude. In the same exit report, I can tell you how many contracts were issued. According to the exit report, you can see there were 28 contracts issued under St. Jude. Some of them up to 3 contracts accumulating up to 10 million in one day. How can this be right? How can we, as St. Lucians, whether we support this political party or that political party, this goes beyond politics. This is about a hospital functioning in a temporary facility, a stadium, for 7 years. And $118 million later, we are no closer to resolving the problem than when we started. And they can all read it in the exit report. I didn't manufacture it. So the reality is, I know people know what the problems are. What is the way forward? Mm-hmm. The way forward is very difficult. Whichever option we choose, it is difficult. So in the first instance, I want to be clear that some remedial work must be done on the existing stadium. The reason for this, the electrical is failing. The plumbing has failed on several occasions. The roof is falling apart. I've had at least 2 meetings with the board of St. Jude, and they have indicated they want to be able to get some remedial work. Because whatever we do, whether we finish the existing St. Jude, the timelines being given to us is about 18 months. I believe we can do it in less time than that if we can start. But some work would have to be done. So the first step is to do some remedial work on the existing stadium so that it can be a little more bearable for the staff down there who are called upon to work under such trying circumstances. The second phase of it is to still explore all possibilities of a makeshift facility at the existing St. Jude in the interim. And whether we like it or not, we have to consider the option that was there from the very beginning of a brand new facility for St. Jude. Now, I know that's hard for a lot of people to swallow, but the reality is, do we bury our head in the sand and pretend that there's not a problem when we all know there's a problem? So because somebody badly spent $118 million, everybody want to make it look like I have some agenda. I've said what my agenda is. If I could have finished the hospital, I would have finished it since yesterday. And I would make the Labour Party look really bad. That's something they could not do in 5 years. I was able to do in 1 year. So if I wanted to score political points, that is what I would have done. But this is not about political points. This is about a healthcare facility that must meet the requirements of the 21st century. We saw the hurricanes. I went to Anguilla. I went to Dominica. I went to BVI. I saw the challenges that they faced. I saw what the wind could have done to these countries. Are we building a hospital that the next hurricane season we may be running for cover in another temporary facility? Is that what we want? Is that what we deserve? And once you have spent the money, you cannot unspend it, you know. Once it's spent, it's spent. So it is not something that when you go and do it, you can undo it. You cannot delete it. Whatever you do remains. So are we not, as a people and as a country, are we not entitled to do what is the best? Now, everybody wants to rush. After the fire of September 2009, we were in emergency mode. Imagine, we are in October 2017, and we are still in emergency mode for St. Jude. Everybody wants to pin the project as if I did what happened there. If you ask me my honest opinion, some people ought to be in jail for what happened at St. Jude. That is where they ought to be. Nobody should be allowed to do these things and get away with it. So I want to assure the people of Vieux-Fort in particular and the staff of St. Jude that we are doing everything we possibly can. And among the things we are doing, we are designing for a new hospital. We are designing tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, I'm receiving all of the as-built drawings for the existing St. Jude Hospital. The reason why we had to do as-built drawings, contrary to what everybody seemed to be saying, there were no approved plans, so we had to go and draw the hospital as it is. As-built drawings carries the idea that you send the architects down there, they measure all walls, they look at everything, and they draw it as it is. So it's like you sitting on a chair and somebody painting a portrait of you. So that is what we had to get the engineers to do. There are no plans for St. Jude. Now, I must be clear, when we talk about plans, it is approved plans. Because anybody can draw anything on a piece of paper and tell you that's a plan. But a plan is only valuable when it receives the requisite approvals. And because there are no requisite approvals, we can clearly say there are no plans for the hospital. Because anybody, I can draw something on a piece of paper and say that's my house. But if I go and start building a house, the DCA will stop me. So when we get these as-built drawings, we have another set of engineers who have some interest in looking at assisting us with St. Jude, who wants to look at if there's a possible reconfiguration that can happen.
Okay. We will take questions. We have about 15 minutes left, I believe. Let's take some questions from the media. Please keep it short and sweet.
Okay, good afternoon again, Mr. Minister Janika Simon. I just wanted to bring to your attention, I know that you spent a lot of time speaking about the importance of being accurate and delivering accurate information. When you mentioned the short-term and medium-term solutions, in the report, the handover report, this was listed under the initial policy decision. However, a few pages down the line, there is a section called revised policy direction. And it indicates that in August 2011, the decision was taken that they would completely renovate the existing facility and leave it as a permanent structure as St. Jude's was before, and then build a new specialist, smaller facility on a new site. So my question to you is, I didn't quite understand exactly what you meant when you said what the current policy direction of this current administration is. Are you looking at reconstructing St. Jude's on the original location to serve as a permanent hospital and do a smaller specialist facility as the revised policy direction? Or are you looking at going to the initial plan, which was to temporarily reconstruct St. Jude's in anticipation of a brand spanking new facility to replace completely the existing hospital?
Okay, so I will respond to this question, but I need to make it clear that when people are giving information, if they wanted me to read the whole report, I could read the whole report because I am just highlighting where we started. Where we started was exactly where we are today. In other words, we've made no more progress. So let me break that down so that whoever is giving the information is very clear about the information that I'm giving. The report, this report was submitted on the 14th of August 2016. The report did highlight what you are saying here in relation to the decisions that were made. And that was for the full renovation of the existing facility and for the building of a specialist hospital. The problem is what started out as the renovation of the facility did not end up being the renovation of the facility. And if you look further in the report, you would see that all the changes in the scope of works did not result in a renovation. It resulted in a reconstruction. And the reconstruction does not meet the basic standards for a hospital. So when people tell me, but the hospital was always there. Yes, if the St. Jude Hospital that was always there is all that was being repaired, then you would not have had the problems that you have here. The problems that we have here are all the additions that was made. So the piece that was added to the back of the existing St. Jude's and the pieces that were added to the front for the emergency area and the extensions are where the problems were derived. So that is why the interim report, or the exit report, as they call it, the handover, that is why it's so critical. So when I say that we now have to go back, we have to go back to the drawing board for the original plan, because somebody messed up what was supposed to be the reconstruction of St. Jude. So now, whether we want to or not, we are forced into a situation where it's not just a new specialist hospital unit. When you are struggling to put 70 beds in what should have been a 115-bed facility, what do? We went through every room and we checked and we measured how many beds we could fit in. And we could not get the 70 minimum beds that the present St. Jude's was saying, if you can give us 70 beds, we can go there. So the report is very clear. And I don't think that I've said anything that is contrary to what the report says. What it is how we interpret what is there. So if you look at St. Jude's, and I saw somebody did a nice job on social media of showing the completed hospital. I wish that was what I had inherited. Then I would not be having this discussion. But you know what? These are 3D renderings that anybody can sit down on a computer. So maybe that's what they meant when they said a state-of-the-art hospital. They meant a rendering of 3D on television and not a reality hospital, not a real hospital, but a make-believe hospital that you can go in on the computer and see, but not on the ground. So let's be clear. Let not the people of St. Lucia be misled by what is there. St. Jude as it is, if I can do anything based on the engineering advice that we get, that we can squeeze in 50 or 60 beds in there, we are going to finish it and allow them to occupy it as a phase 1. We are going to go to a phase 2, which is to build a brand new hospital for the South. But that would not render the existing building obsolete or of no use. There would be other things that it can be utilized for. But it must be clear that to accomplish what the South needs, you have a challenge. And anybody can go, because I know they've been taking everybody upstairs the building. But you need to go to the basement of the building where a lot of things are to be occupied. And you'd see the height of the ceiling, and you'd see the problems that we have in there. So all the engineers, some people have been making pronouncements about the quality of the engineering that we have down there and the estimation. They themselves have not been on site, but they are giving estimates of what the hospital should be. But they are not going to take the word of the people who have been on site, done all the measurements and do everything. And I say to people, it's simple. According to the handover report, $98 million was spent so far. According to the technical audit, 118 million. So we're talking of a difference of 20 million. In the equation, it is not far-fetched by any stretch of the imagination because of the scope of what has happened down there. So is the technical audit so far from what the handover report gave us? No. In terms of the evaluation, no. But The same people who are in charge of the project said that it was going to cost $176 million to finish the hospital. So let's do the math. Let's say I use the 98 million as the actual amount spent so far. 76 million, so you add another 2 million, so that's 98, 100, so that makes it 78 million. Is still required to finish the hospital. If you look at 78 million to finish the hospital as is, if you make all of the reconfigurations that are required to make it acceptable as a hospital, how far are we from 100 million as an estimate for the hospital? That's the reality. You don't need to go there and measure every square inch to make that determination. Just from the estimates, it can be derived what the ballpark figure is going to look like at the end. And if you read the handover report, you'd see how they made their estimations. So it must be clear to all St. Lucians that this is not a discussion about covering up for anybody. This is a discussion where people must be held accountable for what we have for St. Jude. And my only role in all of this has been to expose what has happened. And if you see the committee that made up the oversight committee for the hospital, if I were to read it to you, you would understand why I have been under attack to the extent that I have been. All key people in all key ministries, from Accountant General's department down to permanent secretaries in Ministry of Finance and permanent secretaries in Ministry of Health. This is a network that a lot of people would rather the truth never come to light. So I can well understand why everything is being done. And go and look at the report that you read from. That's who made up the committees. So I can well tell you why I am getting opposition from every angle in government to get basic information about government, about the St. Jude project. You know why? Because a lot of people in government now begin to realize that there's going to be some exposure and people have to answer questions. You know what it is like to come into an environment like this? Where everybody's antenna is up because something is going to be revealed somewhere along the way. And once that happens, people will have to answer questions. So you know who the scapegoat becomes? The minister who is the one doing the probe. But they can make threats. They can do what they want. I am going to carry this probe until the end. And if I'm not there to do it, somebody else I know will do it. But people must be held accountable for what happened on this St. Jude project.
Shanika, you have another question?
In the interest of time, I'm just going to ask you two very quick questions. One, yes or no. Given that you've received a lot of documentation and information regarding the activities of people on the project, have you as yet approached the Director of Public Prosecution with the information that you have? Yes or no to that? And secondly, my question is, do you have any knowledge whether the current project manager has advanced any of the recommendations that were left behind in the handover report as yet?
I didn't know you would ask me questions and tell me how to answer it, but I don't know that you're asking me a question that I can answer yes or no. Everything in government is a process. And people give ministers more credit than ministers deserve. If I had the latitude that you are asking me based on the question you have asked me for there, people would have been in court already. People would have been arrested already.
Well, have you made any representation to the DPP
So,
given what you know already?
I don't know that ministers can make recommendations to the DPP.
Representation to the
Representation.
DPP. This is what I have found. It looks strange. This is what I
No,
have.
that is not the function of a minister. The government has a department that is responsible for all legal matters of the government department. And maybe your question should be, have it been referred to the Attorney General's office? I would tell you yes. The Attorney General is the one who advises the government on legal matters. I don't have access to the Director of Public Prosecution to go and tell him I need him to do this or I need him to do that. Whatever the findings are, the Attorney General office deals with it, and the Attorney General advises the Cabinet and the government in which direction they think that the government should go in dealing with legal matters. So that is completely out of my purview.
The second question was with regard to the current project manager, right, Janika?
Yeah, I was just wondering, the Hanover report made a lot of action recommendations, including making funding proposals and other different actions that she recommended be taken. So I was just wondering, in the 18 months since the new project manager has been on board, do you have any knowledge of him pursuing any of those recommended actions?
There's no project manager.
I don't know that if I was a project manager, that I would take any advice from a project manager who managed such a terribly bad project. I mean, are we real in terms of what? You are telling me that here's a project manager who had a project that should have finished in September of 2011. And that same project manager stayed on the project until 2016. And the project is less than 50% complete. And I would take advice and recommendation from that project manager. I would be worse than the project manager if I did that. So, so if you ask me, and we do not have a project manager on St. Jude, because I realize your question is asking whether the present project manager has taken any of the recommendations. We do not have a project manager on St. Jude. We have not reached the stage of engaging a project manager on St. Jude.
Okay, we'll take a question from Janelle, followed by Sheffield.
Okay. Prime Minister Alan Chancellor during his last press conference indicated that a legal firm had been engaged so as to address the St. Jude's matter, holding those responsible accountable, seeing that you seem to share the same sentiments. As it relates to the legal firm engaged, how exactly have they been engaged, and when exactly can we see some action being taken, if any, because we've heard this story time and time again and nothing has happened. So what is it in this situation that St. Lucia should expect any different?
We are always told that the wheels of justice turn very slowly. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality. When an attorney is going to file a case for you, there's quite a bit, and you're talking about quite an extensive report. Remember, that was just a technical audit. The finances, and I read in the handover report all the reports that were prepared on St. Jude's. I've not been able to see any of these reports. So if anybody knows where these reports are, they can make them available to us. We would be happy. Because I've not seen any financials on St. Jude since the project started. For that matter, I did engage somebody in the ministry when I came in to try and get the finances, the financials. Because in order for you to carry out an audit, you must have the accounts presented so that it can be audited. And the feedback that I got from the individual who was commissioned, an employee of the ministry to do the work, he was getting no cooperation from any department of government to get any information on preparing the accounts of St. Jude. And so that tells you that even the report saying that all of these things were done on a yearly basis and which one that was outstanding, maybe somebody has hidden them somewhere. I need to make one profound statement on this. This entire project of St. Jude's was run from 2 private emails that the ministry has not had access to, that the technical audit did not have access to, but there is going to be a forensic audit. And I know that the forensic audit will get access to these private emails, because you cannot be running a government project of that magnitude and the bulk of the communication happened on 2 private email addresses that the government does not have access to.
When can we expect that forensic audit?
That is with the Ministry of Finance, and I know it's being looked at now to make a determination on moving forward with it.
Sheffield?
The Sadu Construction still have a valid ongoing contract at St. Jude's, and who is going to be the contractor for completion of the project?
No, Sadu is no longer the contractor. Sadu voluntarily terminated his contract. On his own volition, he decided to terminate his contract. We are not at the stage where we know exactly who is going to be engaged at St. Jude's. A lot of it would have to do with the scope of works that's going to be identified finally. And as I indicated, we have the as-built drawings coming in tomorrow. Once we review the as-built drawings, that we can, because you have to submit the as-built drawings to the DCA so that they understand exactly what is there. Then you have to do the new configuration, and with the new configuration, then you are going to have a determination of what the scope of work is going to be, what the extent of the renovations, the breaking down and the building back is going to be. Then you can determine, based on the scope of works that you have, who is best placed to be able to execute that work within the time frames that the government would be comfortable with.
Okay, I think we've definitely gone a little bit over time with the press conference, but it was very in-depth. I would like to ask the minister now, we wanted to get to a lot of other issues, but we will have another press conference very near in the future where you can address some of the other issues within your ministry. We know that the staff of St. Jude have basically sent a petition to the government. They're concerned about the circumstances they've been in for so long. What message do you have for the staff, the long-serving, dedicated staff of St. Jude right now in terms of the way forward as we end?
I think the real heroes of St. Jude have been the staff of St. Jude. All of us, the politicians and all of the contractors and everybody who have been there, we have just been on the sidelines. The real people who matter are the people who have provided these services. And as St. Lucians, we all must say hats off to these dedicated staff who have worked under such trying circumstances in the most difficult situation, and they continue to provide the health care that the people need. What I want to assure them is that we've had a few meetings with the board of St. Jude. We have heard their pleas. I know a petition was sent. I had discussions with the cabinet secretary today. We are scheduling a meeting with the representatives of the union and of the board of St. Jude for some time later this week, so that we can inform them of where we are. We can hear from them their own concerns. But since my last meeting with the board of St. Jude, we have put measures in place to do some renovations at the stadium to bring some relief. I do not want anybody to read what we are doing at the stadium as any indication that we plan to stay there for a longer time than we ought to. It is just that you need to make the work environment as conducive as possible. So I want to encourage the staff of St. Jude to be a little more patient with us and to assist us in seeing to it that the healthcare is provided to the people, but that we are doing all we can within the shortest possible time. I think by the end of this month, we would be able to make some definitive statements as to the way forward for St. Jude. I had some meetings today with some engineers who have some interest in assisting us, and these are not local engineers. For some reason, people have more confidence in foreign engineers than they have in our local engineers. So that's not the reason why I engaged the foreign engineers. They have not been engaged for any money. It's just that they've been following what is happening and have agreed to lend some assistance. So definitely we would see something happening. And by the end of this month to the first week in November, we should be able to make some pronouncements on some things that would be happening at the existing facility and the overall plan for the broader health sector in the South.
We started by kind of talking about economic development, and you sent a very strong message to St. Lucian in terms of the agenda, the ambitious agenda that the government has set forward. What would be your final message to St. Lucians in order for us to achieve what we have been mandated to do?
No government on its own can accomplish the task of growing an economy. We need the input of all St. Lucians. And these are the areas that the discussions need to go from. Our farmers, our fishermen, they play a very vital role in this process. Our hoteliers, our manufacturers. You know, there's so much that we need to do. But the biggest area of concern for me is the area of our human capital. Our output as a people is very critical. If we are going to realize the growth that we are looking for, the human capital plays the most critical role in this. We cannot be importing all the workers that we need in St. Lucia and allow all the money to be repatriated to their origins. We need to develop the local capacity to be able to grow this economy. And I'm telling you, that is an area of weakness for us that we must focus on. And I think all St. Lucians must put their hands to the wheel and to get this country back on course. Because it is not going to happen just by the government, but it is going to happen if everybody would combine their efforts together. Because this is St. Lucia. St. Lucia does not belong to UWP or SLP. St. Lucia belongs to all of us, and at the end of the day, all of us must have a vested interest in the well-being of St. Lucia.
Thank you very much, Minister, for giving us your time and going into such in-depth discussion on a variety of issues today. We hope to have a press conference with you very soon where we can go into some other issues. Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. Thank you very much to the members of the media for your great questions today. I hope you got some elucidation on several issues. Thank you very much to St. Lucians listening to us on NTN, on YouTube, and on Facebook. See you next time.